All right, Well University students, I'm excited to introduce today's guest to you. First of all, most importantly, Alex Q is a Marshall University graduate, so go Herd. Alex's first job out of college was with Learfield IMG College, where he managed both the Marshall University and Ohio University properties. And that basically means Alex sold inventory to corporations who wanted to be associated with Marshall and Ohio. After 6 years with Learfield IMG, Alex went to work at Huddle Inc. Huddle was the leader in high school event tickets and marketing. Alex invested nearly 16 years at Huddle, so like me, he's old. He became president and co-owner of the company. Alex and his business partners sold Huddle to BIP Capital back in 2017. Alex continued with Huddle until June 2020. As an aside, and some of you know this, I worked with Alex at Huddle from 2013 to 2019, just before I came to Fritz's. Let's spin it forward to today. Alex owns Click Partnerships. Click is the sales arm for companies like Hasbro Family Entertainment Centers and also Hershend Family Entertainment. As many of you know, Hershend owns Silver Dollar City right here in Branson, but they also own Dollywood, Newport Aquarium, Harlem Globetrotters, Adventure Aquarium, Stone Mountain Park, and Wild Adventures, among others. On a personal note, before we jump in, Alex is a great friend. He's the most generous leader that I've ever known, and he's a tremendous culture guy. Huddle was known for having an amazing culture, and that was due in large part to Alex and his leadership. I remember bringing a guest to Huddle one day, and he walked in. It happened to be during a lunchtime, and he's like, wow, this is like a mini Google. So I always thought that was a huge compliment. So we're going to dive deep on the topic of culture during today's interview. Alex, welcome to the Wow University classroom, and thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Excited to talk with you, John. And just preface this real quick. So I know I'm from Appalachia, so that's where the accent comes from. I live in Atlanta now, but from Ohio, Southern Ohio. I always say I'm from West Virginia just because it makes more sense. The accent makes more sense if you say you're from West Virginia. So anyway,
I love the accent. Absolutely. So Alex, I just got a bunch of questions for you as we learn more about culture. So there's lots of definitions. Tell me, how do you define culture?
That's a good question. And I think you can, culture comes from the word cult, so it's probably in its distilled nature, probably not the most complimentary word that you can think of, at least from religiosity standpoint. But I really think it comes down to, I'm a pretty simple guy. I think it's really the DNA of the organization. So it's the character, it's really the personality. I mean, that really is it, and you can't really touch it necessarily, but you can feel it, and it's a hard thing to describe. But that's how I would define it in its simplest form for me, anyway.
Well, why is it important? I mean, culture. We talk about it all the time at Fritz's. Lots of organizations talk about it. Why is it important to an organization?
Well, I'll say a couple things toward that end is, and I don't know where I read this. I'm sure I'll also preface this by saying everything that I'm going to say today has probably been stolen, ripped off, or taken from someone else, whether I know it or not. Much of it on purpose, some of it just, I don't even know that what we did, it was just taken or ripped off. But so no new ideas, I guess. And I did hear, going to that if you don't create culture, that in itself will create culture, right? It will be. So you have your company, organization, your school, your family, whatever, it's going to have a culture. It is going to have a personality. So the question, why is it important, is because in my view, my mom always said, again, simple guy, but my mom, I remember her always praying over me and talking to me. My dad was going through a really kind of tough job situation, and he would come home and he was always great to us, but he was just down in the dumps over his job. And my mom started praying for us at a really early age that we would love what we do, whether we made a lot of money or not, that would be a blessing God would kind of instill or give to us, bless us with. And I think I took that really. I always, some things you hear in your life, they don't seem important at the time, but like you keep coming back to it. And I just remember coming back to that time and time again, as my mom always prayed that over me. What if I could extend that or be a part of extending that to everyone within an organization that I get to work in, whether I'm in leadership or down in, when I'm just starting a company. So that's a roundabout answer to get to the point. Why it's important is because, John, we always said this, when we were, I'm around you jokers more than I am with my wife and kids. We spend more time in the workplace than we do at home, by and large, waking hours. Man, why don't we make it somewhere that we love to be, and do it with the people we love to do it with? And we were able to do that, fortunately.
It was special. There's no doubt about it. Let's talk more about that. Specifically thinking about Huddle, how would you describe the culture that you created there in conjunction with others?
Yeah, I think it was definitely with others. It was a consortium or whatever you would call that. But I do think that it was a passion point for sure of mine. I mean, you could probably better describe it than me. I mean, when I think of it, everyone looks at it, it's my purview. So it's the way I look at it. How do I look at it? Would be super fun, wacky a little. I mean, our personalities kind of came out, everyone's, whether they wanted to or not. We had introverts, we had a lot of extroverts, we had everything in the middle. And I thought that we did a really good job of allowing each of those to kind of come to fruition. And some of them had to be pulled out and some of them had to be tampered down. And I think what all that kind of together, allowing everyone to just be who they are and who God created them to be. And it made it fun. And in the midst of all that, though, we had a company we had to, make money to keep in business. So I think we really desire to have a strong work ethic. And I have some things we can share later on that I maybe have a few regrets along those lines. But I would say fun, wacky, high character. The people we hired were just amazing, and people who I would still would and still do go to war with, and my best friends.
Yeah, great men and women, no doubt about it. Let's talk about Huddle had very specific values, but let's talk, before we get specifically to that, let's talk about a company's values and how those values should impact the company's culture.
Yeah, or vice versa. I think it's kind of one and the same. The core values will impact the culture, and the culture ultimately impacts who you hire to get those core values that you want. So the question, how do core values impact culture? And it probably leads into what our core values were. So I may kind of start there. So we had, and this was a really important part. When we started Huddle, relaunched it, we really wanted to know like who we are, why we exist, and how we act, kind of things. And we knew we wanted to serve others. Like what we did was super important in order to make money. We were a ticket company, which, we weren't saving lives. We knew that. We weren't curing cancer. We weren't doctors, lawyers. We were providing free tickets to high schools and selling sponsorships on the back to make money. And, I would rather not tell people about that. Instead, I'd rather tell them about why we existed, which was to serve others. Like that was more important to all of us, I think, in leadership and all the way whoever we hired. It was that's why we were around, and had nothing to do with tickets in many ways. So then it's like from there, it's like how are we going to act? And that's really our core values. And we went round and round and round, started with 30, narrowed down, just a huge process, and ultimately landed on 6, which our CEO, Joey Thacker, dubbed them the B6s. And it was really, when I look back at our time at Huddle, that was one of the things that was kind of legacy type stuff. I mean, we lived by those, and hired against them, and were willing to fire against them. I think that's the critical piece to that. Like, I think, John, you asked why our core value is important. It's really because in many ways it's like a it's a roadmap, that shows, hey, this is who we're going to be, this is how we're going to behave. And if you go outside of that, we have grace for sure, but maybe once, at least that's how we would try. But we would hire people based on those. And those core values were be faithful. So be in front of all of them. So we were to be faithful, be generous, we were to be humble, we were to be likable, we were to be open, and we were to be growing. And those, we wanted it to be things that were everyone could possess. Like we didn't put be handsome. A lot of people aren't handsome, they can't be. It's just not in the cards for them. But these are all attainable. I can be open. I can share. I can be honest with people. I can be faithful, to diligent with whatever God's given me. I can do it. I can be likable. It takes self-awareness, but you can do it, and I could go on, but all those were really, they were how we behaved and how we acted, and it became who we were.
Do you have any examples? Obviously, I love the B6 values, and they were so powerful. Do you have any examples of how those values came to life in the organization?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways. Be growing was a passion for Joey, our CEO, and John, our CMO. And it was really more like that one as an example where Joey went through a book called Compound Effect with everyone we hired, including me and John and everyone else. And it was just it was the first taste of Huddle. Hey, you're going to grow while you're here, and we're going to help you do that. And it's going to be part of your process. And if you don't want to grow, you probably don't need to be here. So, and that's growing, through learning, through spiritually, emotionally, work. You name it. So there were things like that. We had small groups that met within the company. We in those terms, I think, being humble. I think having hard conversations, willing to admit that you're wrong, and that kind of takes in several effects. But I think we lived that out. I think another example, we had B6 cards, if you remember, John, at a time, where we'd have be likable, and everyone would get these little cards, and you could basically pass on words of affirmation to a fellow teammate who, hey man, you've been super faithful this week, and written notes, put them on their desk, kind of anonymously or otherwise. I thought that was kind of cool. I think that being open, the way we define it was, listen, man, you're not going to gossip. You're going to be straight up with people. You're going to have a hard conversation if need be. But I think Dave Ramsey said, where we took this off, he said that gossip is a literal cultural killer and a company killer. So we really wanted to model that, and apologize when necessary, and that started really at the leadership. When we screwed up, I feel like we, most times that I can recall, would own that and apologize and show grace, hopefully in turn.
Yeah, definitely that was modeled for the entire team at Huddle. It's important when you have a great culture or you're building a great culture, it's important to celebrate success. Any examples from the time at Huddle on how success was celebrated?
Well, I think the biggest one I can remember was early on. We had a big audacious goal to hit. I forget what it was, like $6 million in sales, whatever it was. And we said, well, if we do this, we're going to take the entire company and their wives to Cancun and all expenses paid. And it was really a rallying cry because, a lot of these, we had young folks, mostly young folks in our companies, and a lot of older ones who have wives and husbands. And it's like, this was something we could celebrate together and literally not do any work when we were there. And we ended up accomplishing that one year. It was in play for multiple years, but we did it. That was one way to kind of celebrate a big success. But I think little ones, I think back to, we would hire a lot of interns, and those interns would turn into employees, and the process, they were all unique in how we invited them into the family and offered them a job. And some of them were super emotional in a funny way, and some in a really just proud, kind of teary-eyed way. And I deem that a success because you're bringing on family, and I love that.
Yeah, those memories of bringing on new team members, like from an intern to a new. I think about Derek Paganini, and so Wow You Classroom, we had a kangaroo court at Huddle, which occasionally, we'd bring some people into the courtroom and we would try them for really silly offenses. Maybe they left their water glass out and it was sweating, which we thought could leave a mark on the wood. So obviously there needed to be a price to pay for that. But typically we gathered, people thought, okay, there's going to be some silly punishment. In Derek's case, we called him forward, and everyone's getting on him. And then we offer him a job, and it was emotional. Like, it was his first full-time job. And I could tell more stories. Tom, Louise, I could tell more stories. But we created amazing moments at Huddle for people that we were hiring that they will never, ever forget. It wasn't just, hey, here's a job offer. That's cool. And people remember that to a certain extent. But we took it next level on hiring people. And again, it's memories they'll have with them forever. So definitely.
The other thing, and sometimes this is hard, but I look back and I would say, I've heard people appreciate this, and it's a good thing as you guys are in leadership or own your own company or part of an organization, is when people exit, that's inevitable, right? I mean, people are going to grow out of a company, or they're going to leave because it's not the right fit for them. So it may be on our terms or theirs, but how they exit is really critical. And there's many times where we screwed it up, right? But there are several occasions also where we won, and when people would leave, we would affirm them, collectively. And as they left, we were rejoicing with their next chapter, and instead of being bitter, and which can easily take place because you can get hurt when someone leaves you for a better opportunity. It's like, whoa, why aren't we the best opportunity? But I think getting out of yourself, and that's a victory at the end of the day. That's growing, on most of our parts.
We always said we wanted what's best for the team member. And if that was at Huddle, that was amazing. That was great. Yeah. But if it wasn't, we were going to be okay with that, even if it stung a little, because we wanted them. Culture is not always, building a great culture is not always about the fun stuff. Sometimes there's adversity involved with building a great culture. Any examples of how Huddle dealt with adversity?
This is the one, like I go back to this one. This is another Dave Ramsey thing, but and we didn't implement this well until probably mid to latter part of Huddle. But this is good advice too, is hire slow and fire fast. And I think sometimes, and most of the time, certainly early on, we reversed those. We would hire fast because we fell in love with someone in a job interview or whatever. And then we would fire slow. Like we knew they needed to be gone a year before we let them go, and sometimes more. And firing is kind of gets a bad connotation for obvious reasons, but pruning needs to happen for that person and for the company. So I think we learned a lot in that. And as a result, what that does is when you do hire slow and take your time and let the process run out, you're going to win there more times than not, right? You're going to really see the trueness of that person. So that would be some diversity that we definitely experienced. I think another one, John, you remember this, is we printed 180 million tickets every year, so a lot of ticket printing, and we thought we had a better deal on the ticket printer, and we went out to this company called Dillingham out in Los Angeles or somewhere, and they were not printing our tickets basically, and it was really putting us in a pinch. And not a pinch, like could be destructive completely. And as it turns out, they were printing our competitors' tickets, which was just unbelievable. So breaching in a lot of different ways. Well, I remember our CEO, Joey Thacker, living out the B6s in the midst of that challenge, which you're alluding to, John. I mean, he got in a plane, booked it that day, and said, I don't trust them on the phone, so I'm flying out there and I'm going to show up unannounced and we're going to have a conversation. So he was able, in humility, to be faithful to his job, to be open in his dialogue with them, and take the long approach of relationship versus the, hey, you messed up, you're screwing us. And he did it with I thought, a lot of integrity, and it ended up working out eventually. So
a great example. And for the students, Joey will be joining us in a similar format to talk leadership next week. So we're excited to have Joey. Alex, we just concluded actually a study on a book called The Culture Code by a guy named Daniel Coyle, and really, really good book about some of the key ingredients to success in building a great culture. And I wonder if I could share those three with you just one at a time and let you speak into them, because we've really dug deep on these. The first thing of the three that he talked about, if you're going to have a great culture, you need safety. And that's, when you feel emotionally safe, you're able to build relationships. Talk to us a little bit about building safety.
Yeah, I think that takes time, right? And I come at things a little bit, maybe different. We're all a little bit different. I come at things from a biblical worldview, which would mean that to love that person, as their leader. And then as a result, the culture around that will hopefully open up and allow that person to feel safe and just loved and appreciated, and all those things. As it applies really to Huddle and how we did that, I think again, I go back to what he's saying is a lot of what we were saying. I have not read his book, but building those relationships is like be likable was one of our B6s. It's like you've got to kind of be willing to put yourself out there a little bit, and potentially uncomfortable. And one way we did that, John, is we would have accountability partners. That's the example that kind of comes to mind. We did that for 5 years, maybe. For a full year, we'd have one single, we call them accountability buddies, which is still kind of silly. But and we would really define 3 things we wanted to work on in our career, our life, whatever, and really go through life with these guys throughout the year. And then at the end of the year, we all meet together and we talk about how did we do on our goals and everything. And I think what that did is you had to be engaged with these folks and you had to build a relationship. It made you, it forced you. And sometimes these people are way different than you. I can think of 3 on my end where I'm like, this is just uncomfortable. But being able to step into that and really be forced to step into it, I think ultimately created that inclusion, that safety, all those things that this author is talking about. But you have to be intentional about it. It can't just happen, right?
Cool thing about that process with the accountability buddies is, again, we didn't know who we would be matched with. It was really a draw, and we'd make a big deal even of that, of like the selection process, and each came up with a new way to do that. And then, we would celebrate, but quite honestly, a lot of times we'd get partnered with people that we didn't spend a ton of time with. And again, it forced us to get a little comfortable in building a relationship with that individual, because really we had no other choice, but it turned out to be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I'd say one thing in effect to that, like how this is really true. And there was a guy on my specific team who he would make people uncomfortable. He was just not emotionally probably mature, and would just number of things. It would just be odd and whatever. But approaching him about that, you know what I mean? So I think you have to be willing, as sometimes, even if you're not in leadership, even if you're, a new hire or whatever, you've got to be willing to go to a person who's offended you or who you may disagree with and have that dialogue. I mean, if in an appropriate way, right? I mean, and that's the key. So much of it resides. I mean, it's on you. I mean, it just is. And so
one of my best tips there that I've shared with our team before is anytime I needed to have one of those conversations that weren't really fun, and I had a lot of emotion associated with that, I had to give myself a little bit of time before I had the discussion. My emotions needed to be in check. If not, I probably would have said things that weren't as kind as I would want them to be, and the other person deserved better than that. So a little bit of time was always good.
Funny. I mean, how that translates into just life. I have 4 kids, and my middle daughter was playing soccer. She's on club soccer this weekend, and just the coach, you know how it is. I mean, of course, every parent knows better than the coach, right? So I'm that parent in this instance. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, why is this? And it was just kind of making me mad. And I'm not a real emotional, like I typically, but it was just obvious. And I was talking to Angie, my wife, and I said, should I go over and just talk to him? I'll do it appropriate. And she goes, you probably best to do is just hold tight and let's maybe give him a call or tomorrow. And the crazy thing about that is she was 100% right, and exactly what you said, John. The other thing is he came up to us out of the blue and said, man, I'm sorry I didn't. So it beat me. I could have been a real turd, and he's the guy who owned his stuff, and it was really sweet and built a relationship.
Yeah. So safety was number one. The second, the author talks about to build a great culture, a great culture is shared risk. Also vulnerability, which we'll talk about a bit more. He talks about being open, which is one of the Huddle core values, and doing the work together. What would you share with us on being able to sort of share risk with one another?
Well, I think sharing, and I could be wrong here, John, but I think part of that sharing, working together, is there's got to be humility in that. And I think that's usually where the problems unfold, is when there's not. In other words, I'm trying to climb the company ladder. I'm trying to do this or that. Well, I want credit for it, right? And if I don't step over top of this, or if someone takes then I don't get that. And a good friend of mine told me years ago, actually told my parents, and I was a little boy and I overheard him, his pastor, and my dog's crying there. Hey, Jesse. But he said, he was talking about parenting, and you want your kid to be the shining light, but these other kids are doing this in this sport or academics. And he just said, there's enough glory to go around.
Yes.
So how it answers that is that as an employee, as a team member, as a leader, as a wherever you stand in an organization and you're working together, if you can be counter to the culture, and whatever you think, whatever you feel, like I need to do this to get seen. If you will instead shift that to how can I serve, that's ultimately what's going to change your life, right? So that's how I.
All right. And so for the students, this was not set up. Alex just said the words, how can I serve? And Alex, what you don't know is we continually try to elevate our language at Fritz's. And so one of the phrases that we are now using when it's appropriate and right is we'll approach a guest, or maybe they're approaching us, and it's how can I serve you? Basically just said those words, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah.
Third one, all right, we had safety, we had shared risk. And the third thing he said that's required for a great culture is, we need a purpose, right? A common purpose. It's about the team's combined story. Talk a little bit about purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember thinking, and this, I'm sure I ripped this off of someone, but I remember saying it a lot at Huddle, and still say it today, is we just live in this, we're just here a fraction of time, and God's given us this time with people, and it may be you'll be a plumber, and that's what you'll do. You won't have anyone else working with you. You're just going to do you, but you're still going to be interacting with homeowners and companies and whatever. You're going to be paying your bills. You're going to have a family. So I think that where I arrived at all that is, and I can't get to this purpose, is do something that's ultimately going to outlive you, right? Whether you are that plumber or a dental hygienist or a salesperson or a company owner, whatever it is, how are you going to outlive how are you going to live with legacy in mind and not short term, right? And I think that if you can integrate that into culture, I just think people they look at the long-term effects of relationship, of legacy, of what, rather than the short term, I got to get this sale, or I got to make this proposal, or I got to like these things that are somewhat irrelevant in the long term. You live with more purpose and mission. And that's kind of, we default to the short term. There's no question, but how do you press into that and think more eternal,
I would think many of our decisions might be different if we put that legacy filter.
Yeah.
Because it forces us to think a little more long-term about impact. I want to talk now, shift gears slightly, but I think culture is about clarity in many ways. We talk about clarity a lot. It seems easy, but it's not easy. So I think communication, effective communication, has a lot to do with culture. So how can we at Fritz's, how can we learn to communicate clearly with each other so that it reduces confusion, puts us on the same page?
Boy, that's a challenge for me, because I can be windy a little bit, and I like to, my nature is to be the center of attention. I enjoy that. It's just, it can be super negative at times. It's not my favorite trait of me. But a guy named Dr. Ted Tripp is really spoken into me really recently. He used the term, and this was more in terms of parenting, but it can absolutely apply to this, and will for me, is be careful. That this is probably wrong, but word inflation. In other words, if you think through that process, and I still am, is the more words you speak, the less value can happen. Just like inflation today, you see. I mean, it's just, it's going, our dollar is not worth what it was, a year ago. It's just becoming less and less. And the more words you use, you can lose any impact you truly have. And so I would say that get to the point, and we always said this when we were selling to people, and John he I think taught us this, or maybe Donald Miller, is, talk like you're sell like you're talking to a 3rd-year-old. They're under the understanding of a 3rd grader, excuse me. And I think sometimes we should apply that to each other. It's like, man, we should apply that to each other. It's like, man, we don't have to use all these words. Let's get to the point. Like, where have you hurt me? What are the basics? Why am I proud of you? Here, and instead of a word salad that loses all that clarity, that all that gets lost.
I've heard it said that often the person in the room who speaks the least knows the most.
Mm.
And there's
Yes.
probably a lot of truth in that because they're listening.
Yes.
Words do have value because they do choose them wisely. We touched on this briefly a minute ago. I want to go a bit deeper here because culture, and we talk about it, Fritz, is culture is about vulnerability in a lot of ways, but some of us are very uncomfortable with vulnerability. I was totally uncomfortable with it until I got to Huddle, and then I began to get better at it because it was modeled for me by you and others, learning that it was okay to be vulnerable in the workplace. I don't have to pretend I know it all because people know I don't know it all. It's just me being honest. So what does it look like to be appropriately vulnerable in a workplace?
Well, think about it. If you think about it a little bit, is when you think of the people who you want to be around or who engage you, and you can kind of be vulnerable and allow you to be vulnerable, what's that person on the other end of you doing? They're usually disarming, right? They're allowing you, they're taking their guard down. And as a result, you can mirror that. So I think it's kind of incumbent upon each of us really to kind of think through that, not just at work, but everywhere in your life. I mean, that's what creates legacy type stuff. If you're willing to, in humility, share where you've messed up, look for opportunities to be humble, like look for opportunity to share where you've screwed up. Because when you do, that disarms the person across from you and allows them to be broken themselves. And my mom always says, broken's not a bad place to be. It is. That vulnerability is healing. It allows, it's healing for the person across from you and yourself. It probably comes, it's more natural for me. So it's easier for me to say, but if you're not naturally bent towards this, I can imagine how hard it would be. But I would say, test it, try, work at that. Where I need to work to shut up, you may need to work to break down that wall.
There are two types of people in the world, those who are broken and those who need to be.
That's right. That's right.
You mentioned, you alluded to this briefly earlier, but again, I want to go back because even in great cultures, hard conversations have to take place. Like we can't avoid them. How do you approach really tough conversations?
It has historically been one of my biggest challenges because I'm a people pleaser, and John knows this. It's been a struggle that I feel like I've taken steps to get much better at. I don't like to disappoint people. I don't like to. I just want everyone to be happy, and so for me, the first step is prayerfully. It's basically admitting I'm not excited about this. I'm not good at this. Lord, help me. So that for me is where it probably starts. I'm not good at it to this day. I'm clunky. But I think the key, John, and I'm speaking to myself, is to be willing. I've noticed that when I do act on this appropriately and have a hard conversation, all people want is the truth. You don't know you do, but you do. And when you give that truth, however hard it may seem, a burden is lifted, I think, off of both people. And so probably not the best to ask for advice there, but I could sure be receiving some from others.
Well, I appreciate the vulnerability in the answer. We've been talking about that today, and that's really important. Earlier, we talked about values and how you hire and fire against values. Let's talk about interviewing potential new team members. How can you determine if they're going to be a cultural fit, right? Sometimes until you drop the fish in the fish bowl, you don't know how the fish gets along with the others. What are the things that we might be able to do to determine if there's a cultural fit?
I'd say a couple things. Slow down. We talked about that earlier. Just be patient. And I think as you guys, I don't know on the other, the folks in this room or listening to this is, I don't know if anyone's a business owner, aspires to be, or if you're not, like right now, I mean, you could be working wherever, part-time, full-time, whatever. That slow down goes for you too. Like as you're stepping into your next opportunity, pump the brakes a little bit, and look at it eyes wide open. Does this a fit for me? Can I grow here? Can I be honest here? All those things. But for us, John, I look back at by far the most successful hires that we had came in two fronts. Number one, it was through our internship program, where we always said this. I mean, when you're around, you can fool people in an interview. It's super easy. I can do it. I'm guilty of, like, I could kill an interview, and then they get me, and then wheels fall off. Chief manipulator right here. It's something I have to work on. Most salespeople probably do, and that's what I'm gifted at. But so that's an interview you can easy. The 6 months with an entire team as an intern, you're going to start seeing the real person, and that's such a gift. For both ways. Hey, this is a total fit, or this is a disaster, and it allows you to be patient. So I'd say that's the first, and the second is probably counter to what most people would agree with. And Culture Bible, in my opinion, was written by Tony Hsieh and Zappos, and his whole thing on creating culture was, your best employees, go hire their friends, because that's who they're like. And when I think about even John, you and I mean, I knew John Bond, and his character, kind of not just from me knowing him, but from my peers knowing him. So bringing John on, and then, most people that we initially hired were friends on purpose, and that goes against me. And I've gotten burned very bad 2 times on that. And so it can go the opposite way without a doubt. But in my opinion, the benefit far exceeds the negative.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Culture, we've talked about it really in the context of work, which was our primary goal today. But as we begin to close with the last couple of questions here, I want to talk about culture at home and how important it is. You've mentioned your lovely bride, Angie. You're a dad to 4 great kids. Give us some thoughts on how you've intentionally created a great culture in your home.
Yeah, and your true character's coming out at home, right? That's where you're most comfortable. All my works are visible to everyone here, so they know the real me as much as, the mask is off at home. So, and still a work in progress. I think I go back to something Andy Stanley always says, like this is definitely paraphrasing, but what you want others to know, especially in a leadership type position, say it over and over and over again. And when they get it, say it over and over and over again. So simplify, 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 and then repetition, 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 repetition. So one thing we say, again, everyone, we come from my worldview is very much, I'm a Christian. I make no bones about it. I want the world to know the love of Jesus. I mean, but if you don't, I love you too. And that's okay. I don't, I'll proselytize in that. I'll tell you, I love Jesus and I want you to know him because I think he's going to change your life. But if you don't, that's okay. Listen, we're still cool. I still love you, and I hope you like me. But anyway, so that what I mean by that, and kind of putting it all together, is we use 3 words in our house that kind of define us, and they're written on our walls, on our doors we're leaving. I have it engraved on stuff, written on shoes, and it's just honor the king. And I say it when I drop the kids off, when I see them, when they have soccer, when they do this or that, when I talk to Angie about it. And I think that's why we exist. And why our family is on planet Earth is to honor the king. And the king in our mind is Jesus. And how, if you truly do that, if our family truly does that, there's going to be a lot of joy in our lives and others' lives. And I think, not to get out into the other ways we do stuff, but that's where it begins and ends with us.
Yeah. I haven't intentionally, I haven't taken any notes today because I want to be fully present in the interview when we're playing it for the class, as we are right now. I will take some notes, but I did write those 3 words down. Thank you for that, Alex. I love that. Honor the king. That's tremendous. As we begin to close, are there any culture related resources that you'd recommend? I mean, we have a group of students here who are here because they want to be, not because they have to be. They're doing stuff outside of work, reading books and answering questions and coming to class. So they are hungry to learn more and get better as they develop in their leadership. Any resources that you would point them to that might be helpful to them in their journey?
I mean, the things that help me most, I mean, I alluded to earlier. So Tony Shea, and I don't even know how you spell his last name. It's like HSEI, whatever. But the guy who started Zappos, the online shoe retailer, he wrote a book called Delivering Happiness. That was back in maybe 2000. Still amazing. I still look through it, and a lot of what we implemented at Huddle was as a result of that. A couple others. Linchpin by Seth Godin was really helpful. Not in terms of acting on culture. Like, one thing I remember in that book is he would say, just ship it, meaning if put wheels on your idea. Don't just have an idea, go with it, do something with it, even if it sucks. At least you'll learn from that, you'll make it better, or you'll stop it. And I think that does fall back to culture and the work and who you're trying, who you are as an employee. The other one would be Start Something That Matters. That's by Blake Mikowski. He started Tom's, and his book's amazing on culture. And the last one I would say is, if you're interested in the Bible, if you're a Christian or non-Christian, it doesn't really matter, is the book of Nehemiah. It's great on leadership, but also leadership, like Nehemiah was a leader, and how did he get all his ducks in a row and his people rowing in the right direction? That's been helpful to me.
Yeah. He stayed on the wall, right? No distractions.
That's the big one, right? Yeah.
Alex, as we close, what words of encouragement would you have for our students?
Yeah, I mean, like I come from Appalachia, like you guys are in Ozarks, right? I mean, primarily, is that where everyone's from, John?
Yes.
And you're basically where I'm from, only I'm east of you, Appalachian Mountains. And I've been to Branson, Springfield more times than I can count. It reminds me a lot of home. And now I live in Atlanta, and coming to Atlanta, it was like, man, there's so much opportunity. Like, I wasn't exposed to a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you guys may have been, or are, or whatever. I wasn't. And that's okay. I think that really discouraged me when I moved to Atlanta 20 some years ago, and it scared me. But I learned really quick that if you are willing to be vulnerable and willing to, the biggest thing that I did was I attached my train. I saw a man who I wanted to be like in many ways, who was older than me. And I asked him to basically invest in me. And when I did that, I think that that little step ended up changing my life. And I would encourage you to take a chance, take a risk, and don't. I think I see you guys in me a little bit, you know, because I know it's just don't let the lack of opportunity define you. Right? Go and be willing to open your eyes to some things that you just never thought were available or opportunities. And in order to do that, you got to put yourself out there and ask for help. So hope that helps.
It does. I think it was Jim Rohn, perhaps, but when you are willing to change, everything will change for you. And you have to be willing to make those adjustments. Alex, this has been amazing. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time. It's valuable, and you've done that for us and for our students. So I want to thank you. Thank you for your friendship through all these many years. You're a guy that I respect, and I think I know the students can see why today. So again, just thanks for visiting with us today.
Yeah, man. Thanks you. I'll see you.